In what comes as a surprise to absolutely nobody, a Kiwi Super Rugby side has won the championship again. Now, the Australian rugby sides have done pretty well. The Waratahs had a good year. Al?
Yeah.
Are you happy with the way things have gone?
From the Waratahs season, up and down. I think they finished their second last game against the Highlanders very well. I think they were showing some good consistency, but had some inconsistent moments before then. I think they really shot themselves in the foot against the Brumbies, and that was not so good. But I think generally the way they ended the season, I think they really performed well without Michael Hooper, and during the season without Israel Folau. So they're showing they're more than just a two-trick team. So I think, generally Waratahs in a good position, but they'll be ruining some lost chances during the season.
I think the Rebels, they've just missed out on their first final series. They just finished below it's 8 sides, to be fair, so it was half the comp. But they did very well for their first year as a combined side. How'd you go with Melbourne?
Yeah, I think it's still a great unknown. I think everyone wants to know, what is their salary cap and how much do they get to spend compared to everyone else. And then I think the end of season behaviour really probably takes a couple of points off them out of 10 for a season. You can't consistently have those type of cultural issues down there, which they've had. And I don't think it paints rugby in a good position. Ultimately, we're trying to engage people to want to play the game. And I don't think as a family you want to hear that.
I think, for me, sorry to jump in, but I think that the Rebels were actually disappointing. They had a rock star sheet. They had pretty much all the force players. They started the season really well, but then as soon as they lost Wilgenia, their season fell apart. And I think they really struggled from that senior leadership. And that shows in the end of season behaviour as well, where they need a couple of key individuals to tell the blokes, guys, this is the championship games now. If we lose this game or we don't get the bonus point or we don't do well, we're out of here. And they were in a absolutely box seat midway through the season to be conference champions, and even after they weren't conference champions, to make it into the finals. And then they just had a run of poor games where they were leading the game or they were in a good position and then just didn't have the maturity to see it out. And I think Wilgenia was the key, not being in there. And then there was a couple other guys who could have stood up and didn't. So, and that was on and off the field. And so I think is it Wessels, their coach? Wessels will be looking for more leadership from some of the guys there to say you can stand up.
And they didn't develop key positions. If you look across the franchises, the Waratahs developed Jake Gordon, obviously as a 9, as a backup for Nick Phipps. So we talk about it all here a lot about the halves positions.
Well, they don't have a 5'8", Melbourne.
Yeah, but that's what I was going to come to. Yeah. If Genia doesn't play for them, they've got no capacity to play what's in front of them on football. So they ended up using Reece Hodge, but they didn't use Taylor Adams. They didn't use Deb Brissini. They've obviously brought back Matt Tamua next year. But their job is to develop good players to replace those. That's what the Waratahs did when they lost Israel or they lost Hooper. They put in Will Miller at 7. Alex Newsom had a great season on the wing for the Waratahs, so did Cam Clark before. Obviously, injuries got the better room to an extent. But the Rebels haven't developed players. So you've got to look at your system and say, well, what are we actually doing to make our team more competitive when we don't have Will? Well, Will's obviously a world-class player. So I think Super Rugby, from their perspective, would be disappointing. And they probably haven't resolved those issues to how they're going to climb the ladder next year again.
The Reds had they had a mixed season. They started off really well and there were some really good things from a young side that they put together. And I think if you look at Australian rugby in its entirety, as in you've now got 4 sides and all of those 4 sides at different times of the year did well, there's a lot that Australian rugby can take from it, I think.
Oh, absolutely. If Karevi leaves and goes to the Brumbies, though, that's the male, then that's not a great sign for the Reds. That shows that clearly something's not happening. Do you know what I mean? If he's the captain of the team and you're jumping ship, that means, culturally there's got to be something wrong.
But it's interesting, Brad Thorne's a bit of a my way or the highway type guy. And it was really interesting. He made some big calls early on, like with Hunt, Slipper and all the way through, Hunt, Slipper and Quade Cooper, just saying, literally these 3 most expensive, most experienced players saying, don't unbar you if you've got the wrong attitude and bring the wrong stuff to the team.
Nick Frisbee too.
Nick Frisbee as well, but what he did do, look, Brad Thorne is someone who's hard work, fitness and just gutsing it out. And he had a forward pack at the end who did that. Some of the players in the back line, they absolutely wouldn't have even had a team. But I think that bodes well as a development pathway for the Wallabies. You see some of those young guys in the outer squad. But those guys will have to take a next step, like the next step up next year. And likewise, Brad Thorne, I think, will have to take a next step up next year, develop a more holistic team for them to go further. But look, really pleasing signs in terms of set piece hasn't always been an issue, but there's been some issues in Australian rugby for a long time at the Super Rugby level, and they were dominating scrums at the end with a really young pack of unknown guys. So as a starting point, not bad, but yeah, obviously Reds fans not happy where they finish on the table.
But I think the measure's got to be what the Rabbitohs have done with Searbold and then Paul Devlin, their athletic performance coordinator, where they finished 14th. They recruited one guy in Dane Gagai, and then they revolutionised the Burgess brothers, the way they played, heads-up footy, playing off the cuff. Yeah. If we're fair income in rugby, that's got to be the barometer for the Reds and the Rebels next year. They need to be able to go from being, I think the Rabbitohs were 14th this year and now they're obviously first. If they can go from the Reds and Rebels playing because they still, like you're right, Al, they still play one-off rugby, the Reds, very forward-orientated, and they're great. Panga Amosa, Taniela Tupou, wonderful footballers, and Brad Thorne's done a great job with that. But they don't play the football that's required to win Super Rugby. And the Rebels, well, they just play like a hybrid game of South African / Western Force, which again, is neither here nor there.
One thing that the Australian Rugby Union, or Rugby Australia, whatever they're called now, they've rebranded. That was good. They're now trying to do the top-down sort of approach. So they've got a fitness guy who runs the high-performance stuff with the Wallabies, Hayden Masters. Now, there is no question, and you're probably the best to speak on this, that the Australian rugby, Super Rugby sides have been fitter this year. They've been coming home in the back end of games. They haven't been rolling away at that 60-minute mark. So they are fitter. Yeah. Now, is that because they've started to go programs from the top and everyone's doing the same stuff? Or is it, why are they fitter? Is it individuals?
Al's, from a governance perspective, he'd be involved. But I think what Hayden and Michael Cheika have done a great job is getting out to the franchise and saying, here's some benchmarks. So here's a minimum threshold and a maximum threshold, but we don't mind if you go above that. But there's a minimum threshold for base standard physical conditioning and preparation that you have to hit. And then they monitor that each week. And you're right, I think it's shown in the performances against Ireland that the Wallabies are clearly fitter, and that's shown in our Super Rugby performances.
And that's exactly that. And that's what they did at the start of the season, or after last season, where Cheika turned up and said, guys, to the Super Rugby sides, what I got from you guys was unfit players who couldn't pass properly or catch properly. And so he set those minimum benchmarks, saying everyone who turns up has got to hit those minimum benchmarks, and if they don't, they're not going to get in the side. But you guys, as Super Rugby sides, have got to communicate those and train to those. And so all through the pre-season, all of the Australian Super Rugby sides worked much harder on the fitness, and during the season it was monitored. And I think we saw it, as you said, Tom, in the Wallaby series against the Irish. It was really good, and also in the back end of the game. Brumbies and Waratahs, I think, were the fittest that I've seen them for years, which is fantastic, which means hopefully we go into this Bledisloe Cup series in far better place because they're fitter. And that's come from, luckily, the coaches at the start of the season saying, everyone, look, we're looking at all of you. We're not just looking at the Wallaby players in each of the squads.
Yeah. I think you talked about pathways before, and obviously the pathways to the Wallabies is through the Super Rugby sides, which we've discussed. The pathways to the Super Rugby sides are obviously through your Shoot Shield or your Brisbane equivalents. Now, there's been a lot of, backlash from rugby people in the last few years about whether or not the grassroots have been abandoned, and I think they're trying to change that perception. But, you're a proud Sydney Uni man, you always have been, and you've been a big proponent of Shoot Shield. What do you think the future of that is? Do you think that this NRC comp that they're bringing in is taking away from that Shoot Shield?
I think that's a really good question. Obviously when I was, heavily involved in Sydney Uni, I'd probably have my uni hat on and say that club rugby or Shoot Shield was the key. But for me, probably being an outsider now and looking back, is that you just want guys, whether it be through the Shoot Shield, and I'm all for it, the tribalism, the gates, that crowd, I love it. But we've got to be producing footballers that can add value at Super Rugby level. And I don't know what the mode of competition is, and whether it be sevens or 20s or academies or Shoot Shield or NRC, but we need to be producing better footballers because that's going to save the game of rugby. We can, take or put our bias position or take that position off, our hat off. We need to be making footballers better so when they go to the next level, they can add value. And that would be my one concern of, are guys that dominate Shoot Shield ready to play Super Rugby? Are guys that are dominating NRC ready to play Super Rugby. And we see it in the Australian cricket team. Guys can be really good shield players, but they can't step up and be really good test match players. And I think, Al, that's where we've got lost a lot probably in the last 5 or 6 years.
All of our test cricket.
That's right. Yeah, all the test cricketers is rubbish. But anyway, not all of them. Look, I was massively against NRC when it came in. I was all for like an FA Cup type system with the shoot shield teams and the Brisbane and the other state champions and play them all together at the end. But I think the movement towards actually cutting down a few teams in the NRC, but also making sure that the NRC now becomes elite pathway is far better. So what's happened this year in New South Wales is they've cut out one of the teams, and so they've just said, right, you've got city and country. So all of the shoot shield teams are evaluated as, guys, this is, all of you are, if you do well here, then you will go through a pathway, like the old school pathway. You were picked for either city or country. And then you play in the NRC as city and country. And if you do really well in city for city and country, you take the next step up and play for Waratahs or get a Waratahs contract. And I think that's the way it needs to be. Where previously it was like, okay, well, you can get contracted as a force player and still come over and play for the, I don't know, Sydney Stars or whoever it was. And it was really muddy in terms of, I might play well in the, I don't know, for uni or Norse, but, then I'll go to the Rebels to get a gig there, the NRC. Where New South Wales just said, no, we're not doing that. We're going, this is for the shoot shield, good players. You play then representative rugby, city and country, and you go on and you play NRC. So, even if the NRC falls over, you can say, okay, we'll just play city and city versus country games, and it's sweet. You still have a pathway, and that makes it, I think, a lot better for the players, thinking, okay, now I know if I do well in shoot shield, and shoot shield is a massive step up, too far a step to then go to Super Rugby straight away, I will play with the other great players from the shoot shield, and we'll play together, and we'll learn how to play after travel. We'll learn how to play away from home in a different state. We'll learn how to play other really good players, not some good players some week and some the other week. So hopefully do well there. You're some of the attributes of what you need for a Super Rugby side. So I think it's a good thing. I think, unfortunately, it's been absolutely butchered by Fox having it on Thursday night, having it all over.
One game.
Just one game. So hopefully, now that Rugby Australia has said, right, this is going to stay, they're actually going to make it stay. Like the AFL has a policy that the new teams stick around for 20 years. So have a 20-year lifespan of GWS and Gold Coast Suns, and it would have been really easy for them to cut Gold Coast Suns and GWS a couple of years ago. But now GWS is in the final series, they're looking good. You see the Swans, once again, only came good after 30 years. I'm hoping that they stick with this and say, let's actually make this a proper development pathway, and not just for the shoot shield teams, but if you come from under 20s, if you come from Colts, then you have the same. We have really good pathways to be able to actually say, I know how to get the Waratahs and then onto the
But
Wallabies.
it needs to be for coaches as well, because otherwise
absolutely.
you get coaches that are just thinking that this is their moment in the sun to coach a certain way. And so I think if the one thing we can learn from Super Rugby, and I'm very against the saying, look at what the Kiwis do, but the Crusaders' performances in the last 2 years have built upon what they've done at ITM Cup or NPC for 5 or 6 years, where they've obviously dominated for a long period of time, and Richie Mo'unga and all these young guys like Bridge have come through.
I think you'd be crazy not to look at their system. I mean, it's a system that historically is the best system in the world.
We probably don't need to get all their coaches coaching out here, because I don't think there's many Aussies coaching over there. But my point being is that I don't think we need to stop fighting about what is at Club Rugby NRC and go, how do we make guys better? So therefore, Waratahs play an attractive style of footy like they did against the Brumbies, where it was a great game of footy, even though they didn't win. It was a very even, open contest, good skill. Or even their semi-final performance against the Highlanders. And then people come and watch. And then when people come and watch, there's more money in the game, and then we can invest that in coaches, and then all of a sudden we've got a really good product. If you genuinely love rugby, you need to remove your bias about, whether it be NRC or Shoot Shield, and formulate a game that allows guys, like we've just spoken about, there's no 5'8" in Super Rugby. Like if there's any good 5'8" in the NRC or Shoot Shield, surely they'd be getting a gig. Like, do you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, interestingly, I reckon one of the main problems with the NRC is you take young kids, sort of 23, 24.
Is that young?
It is to me now. It definitely is to me. Should be to you too. You've got kids that have to make a choice for 6 weeks of the year whether or not they're going to be part of the NRC. Now, I know of at least 2 young kids from Randwick that are doing their apprenticeships, and they can't afford to take 6 weeks off work. So they choose not to play in that NRC competition purely for financial reasons, because I think they get $2,000 or something for that period of time. But how are you going to get 6 weeks off work if you're an apprentice? The plumbers don't give a shit. You turn up to work where you don't have a job. And so what you're doing is you're taking a semi-professional attitude to amateurs.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is where the whole system falls down, because you've got blokes that are playing for the love of the game, for the shoot shield. And for me, saying that people aren't going to be able to step up to Super Rugby, what did we do before that? We managed to win a cup, like a World Cup in '99, where blokes were coming up.
Yeah,
there was no pathway.
But the
you
game's
guys.
gone too far now. The speed and athleticism of people, like you looked at what the Lions did to the Waratahs forwards in the second half. Now, some of those young guys have been in 20s programs, and now, correct me if I'm wrong, they're the very, very best of shoot, shield and 20s programs, and we weren't even close to being ready to deal with that physicality and presence. So I get what you're saying, and I think that is important, and it's noted, and maybe we can come up with some funding strategies to support those guys.
And look, I think you can still pick out a shoot shield. It's not saying you can't pick anyone out a shoot shield, but it's that depth you're talking about. Like in the second half when, the Lions brought on some reserves and they still powered over the top of us, and we brought on reserves and they were not found wanting, but they just didn't bring the same toughness.
You can't say found wanting, but we can.
No, but it's one of those things where the more competition rugby these guys play, the better. And so, as opposed to becoming professional trainers, the shoot shield competition is a relatively short competition. The Super Rugby competition is a relatively short competition. So if you don't make Wallabies, you're literally not playing rugby for 6 months of the year. And we're pretty much the only tier 1 rugby nation who does that, if you don't have NRC or something equivalent. So that's where you just need extra games, and whether that's the shoot shield for longer, but then once again, they're playing pretty much home and away now, and you reach a point where there's just not enough high-level rugby all the way through.
I'm not hating on the NRC.
No, I know. But the lunacy of the NRC starting the same weekend as the shoot shield grand final is absurd.
That is ridiculous.
that is madness.
Are we fair income? Like, let's ruin a game.
Who scheduled that?
I have no idea. But this is the whole madness about the
Still got a job, don't they?
Yeah, that's right. But the whole schedule of the Australian rugby calendar is absolute madness. You've got a Super Rugby competition, which is fantastic until you stop in June for a month, and then they go away for a month. Like, why the hell don't we keep playing Super Rugby through that window? Just like in France, you keep playing through the international window. It means that, sure, you won't get the top guys, but you still get the rugby week in, week out, and then test the guys' depths. It gets like a whole lot of benefits getting those through.
And to support that comment about Al, like Bernard, Ire Simone, who was at Norths 2 years ago when they won the comp, was the best player in the shoot shield. Was absolutely standout. Came across from South 20s League, dominated. He's been 2 years in the Waratahs, and he's played a handful of games.
Yeah.
And he's now going to the Brumbies, and he's probably got next year with another good off-season at 3 or 4 years into the professional program, will do really well at Super Rugby. But that's the level, and I know only it's one example, but that's the difference between shoot shield and stepping up to that level. And I think that what Al is touching upon earlier about that, there is a gap, and I think we've got to try and find a way of narrowing that gap, both from a coaching perspective and also playing.
Yeah. I think one of the main problems that Australian rugby's got at the moment, realistically, is a perception problem, and the reality of how Australian rugby.
I can relate to perception.
It's not always accurate, is it, Tom? And
no.
I look at Australian rugby and where it's at now. Every story that you hear about rugby is negative. It really is. And for me, there's a groundswell of people. You look at the shoot shield, and I go back to the shoot shield, but if you look at the crowds they're getting now at the shoot shield, it's booming. Yeah. And that's because the fabric of the game is inside people that have played it and loved it. I mean, I speak as someone, obviously, who's played the game, and it gave me so much more than I could ever give it, and it teaches you something. Yeah, it did. It really did. It teaches you something that's bigger than yourself. Yeah. You're part of something that's bigger than yourself. And the Australian Rugby Union, and I think Michael Cheika are trying to tap in, Rugby Australia, they're tapping into that.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the trial last week that they had where they had the Australians playing,
brilliant.
Unreal.
10,000 people.
But see, this is, look, I agree with you. I think perception is a massive thing. I think rugby in Australia at the moment is really strong at community level. You're getting big crowds, you're getting great games generally at shoot shield level. I think it's actually strong at international level. I think we showed that against the European champions being Ireland. It was a fantastic series, and I think what Cheika's doing is great, and I think we're going into this international series coming up with some real optimism. Where I think is an issue is not necessarily the Australian Super Rugby teams, but I think the competition in which they sit. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that the Super Rugby competition is one which is really hard to love. In fact, it's impossible to love because you can't understand it. Look, I played Super Rugby. I'm intimately involved in a Super Rugby side. But even I sit there going, who's going to make the finals here? What's going to happen in the conferences? You've got a conference system which is difficult to understand. And then you've got 2/3 of the teams you play against, no one knows or cares about in Australia. When you've got a final last week against obviously well-known Australian, well-known New Zealand side against a South African side that's been a fantastic South African side, but no one knows. So you've got this competition structure where 2/3 of your games are going to be games where people really don't care about, and so you just can't love that. And so that's where the perception comes in when you're not getting 35,000 people to match, because it's like, well, who are they playing this weekend?
So Al, who's driving that? Is that Sanzar? And I guess from Byrne and my perspective is that, like, who's accountable for that? Because they've butchered a competition.
Well, it's Sanzar. Sanzar is made up of the 3 nations, or now 5 nations that make up Sanzar. But Sanzar is essentially South Africa, Australia, New Zealand making decisions about the competition. And look, Super 12 and early days of Super 15 was a fantastic competition and went really well. Then literally all the rest of the world in rugby and rugby league and everyone caught up. And I think now that pushing players too far, it's ridiculous. The Waratahs went on a 33,000 kilometre 3-week trip. And how can you possibly play well for the next week afterwards, or 2 weeks afterwards, if you've just done 33,000 kilometres? But also you're playing in different time zones against different teams all the way across the world. And I think that's fine for a really short period, but when you're talking about 6 months of the year, it just doesn't help the players, just doesn't help the competition, and it comes down to sort of tinkering the whole time with what was good, and suddenly you come up with a Frankenstein.
Is there a governance, like, are they accountable for that?
Oh, they are, and they're saying, look, you're seeing it across the board, crowds have fallen. So in qualifying final down in Christchurch, the Crusaders vs Sharks had 9,000 people. And that's because, once again, people in New Zealand, in Christchurch, and admittedly it was a cold night in Christchurch, but you sit there going, well, I don't know the Sharks, I'm really not fussed, I'm not going to go out there and watch. But for me, and I'm probably in trouble saying this, but I think it should be an Anzac tournament at the very least. I think just there's not enough worth gained by heading over to South Africa to play and have South African sides going over here.
Except it's a good trip and place to visit.
Well, it's a fantastic place to visit as a player, but go there on your pre-season like the AFL players do, as opposed to go. And I think to bring it to look now, all the teams are East Coast, or even bring back in the Western Force and have a competition which is Australia, New Zealand, or even Australia and Pacific Islands. I think there needs to be more knowledge of the players. It needs to be in the right time zones. And it needs to be more tribalism. You look at international level. There's a ton of tribalism. You look at Shoot Shield. There's a ton of tribalism, and they're really successful. And the competitions are really healthy. And then you look at Super Rugby in the middle, and the tribalism. It's really hard to be tribal when you don't know who your players are, and you're chopping and changing franchises and conference systems you just don't know about. And they need to bring that back.
Has Andrew Forrest done enough to keep the force alive, or are they too far gone to bring back?
No, look, I can't speak with any knowledge there. Yes, look, I think they can still come back. I think they're still playing competitive rugby, but I don't know Twiggy Forrest's wider competition. I don't know how much that's going to help with actually trying to create.
I actually threw my hat in the ring to get a game, but they didn't really get back to me.
I think they want crowds.
That's right, yeah. Got to brought him back. But it's it's certainly an option. Get him involved, get actually a different competition structure. But it's going to be really tough because you've got to go, and they come to crunch point at 2020 when you have to renegotiate the TV deal. You're going to go to them saying, actually, we want to cut a third of the viewers, and I'm not envious of Australian rugby at their position at the moment, on their voice on the Sanzar board, because they've stuck between a rock and a hard place. There's no happy ending for them.
Yeah, but that's what governance is, right? Like that's where the AFL is so brave, and you see these great. I don't know. They're run by the 16 clubs, is that right? And they have this courage and fortitude to say, we won't let you fail. Whereas I feel like in rugby it's like pie in the sky. Well, we might do this. Do you know what I mean? Is that fair?
They've also got a lot of money, and the reality of rugby at the moment is that everybody who loves rugby needs to get out and start going to games, bringing the crowd's back,
Yeah.
that'll bring the revenue, and then all of a sudden we're in a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.